Welcome to FJ's Trainer School. Unexplored. It's the scariest time of year. No, it's not tax season. Yeah. It's the second scariest time of year, class. And I'm not building any tension at all and jumping right into some of the spookiest Pokemon around. But I'm just not picking scary Pokemon. Oh, no. I've found 7 of the biggest overarching themes of Halloween, like bats, skeletons, and ghosts. Research why they're even a part of Halloween lore and history, and then gave a Pokemon that best represents each category. So grab your trick-or-treat buckets, dim the lights, and don't get jump scared from watching TikTok on your phone. It's Halloween time. Hold on, I have 2 things. If you like any of the stuff I do, be sure to drop a follow, or like, or share the video. It's always greatly appreciated. And 2, this video is sponsored by no one. But if you want to support me, you can check out my Ko-Fi, Patreon, or if you wanted something silly commissioned, check out my VGen. Halloween and bats are pretty synonymous. Bats are linked to Halloween because of obvious things like Dracula, vampires, sucking the blood out of things, and being nocturnal. But the best tidbit I've found starts just west of Beans and Toast Land. The Samhain Festival is what the Celts started back 2,000 years ago in Ireland, which is essentially Halloween before Halloween. On October 31st, it was believed the line between our world and the spirit world was the thinnest, and that they crossed over to visit. They celebrated with bonfires, costumes, which protected the attendees, and tons of food. Samhain were essentially the first Halloween parties to exist. And you know what attracts all the bugs that bats eat? Nighttime, light, and food. So, bats naturally gravitated to these parties and got to gobble up many insect treats so they could fatten themselves up for the winter. And with the way the bats swooped around nabbing insects, it was believed they were also snatching spirits that were up to no good when they did so. Now, there are plenty of bat Pokemon, the Zubat line, the Gligar line, and the Noibat line, to name a few. But there's one big one that I think correlates with Halloween, and that's Guzzlord. Now, you might be thinking, Teacher FJ, Guzzlord isn't a bat. And while I do agree with you, I also don't. Guzzlord is an Ultra Beast from Generation 7 that is a dark and dragon type. It is said to be inspired by H.P. Lovecraft Eldritch abominations, so it having bat-like components, which I'll point out in a moment, is on the table. It's also likely based on the Agrajag from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is a monster that can reincarnate and repeatedly attacks Arthur over and over again, with one of its last forms being a bat-like creature living in a cave system. Guzzlord also has very clear bat-like wings over his eyes and tiny bat-like wings on the shoulder area mass section thing of its body. Caves are where bats normally reside too, and the only places you can get Guzzlord in the games are from a Resolution Cave, the Ultra Ruin, and the Max Lair, which are all pretty much caves or cave-like places. Not to mention the fact that eating a ton of insects during the Samhain festival as a bat could be correlated to kids eating a metric ton of candy that they get from trick-or-treating. Further this, with Guzzlord being able to learn the moves Stockpile, Bite, Swallow, Gastroacid, and Belch, to being what kids do with candy for days and days after Halloween, with Guzzlord also being based on gluttony and black holes, it consuming everything in sight, like those Samhain bats, and kiddos going door to door. I'm staking my claim that Guzzlord is the best Halloween bat Pokemon. Halloween and witches go hand in hand, but not for the reasons you may think. Everyone with a pulse saw Hocus Pocus growing up, and witches have been a part of pop culture forever. It's most always been in a positive light, too. But in Europe and the US, real life witches had it bad. The first witches were known to be around with the Celts during the era of celebrating Samhain. From now on, if I mention Samhain, you kinda already got the base lore behind it. After the Celts were taken over by the Roman Empire, the once revered witches were now turned on by the church and slandered into becoming devil-worshipping hags. Most of the time, witches are of the female variety. They believed that witches would turn people into cats, bats, and spiders. Hey look, Halloween creatures. When the 1400s hit, witch hysteria had spread across Europe, and 100,000 people were accused of witchcraft, with upwards of 50,000 people being executed for it. In the mid-1600s, the infamous Salem witch trials occurred in America too, where 30 people were found guilty and were either executed or put in prison to die. It wasn't until Irish settlers made their way over to America that Halloween as we know it was born and the witch hysteria started to die down. I went with Miss Magius over Hatterene because of its background. While both are from the lore of the witches in Europe, Miss Magius has the connection of likely being a banshee, which is a female spirit from Irish myth. Plus, this Generation 4 evolution is a ghost type too, and I tried to keep everything on this list when I was making it ghost type if I could. Obviously, Miss Magius is based on mages and witches. It has mage or perhaps magic in its name, clearly donning a witch's hat as well. Pokedex entries state that it chants and mutters incantations, which torment those who hear it, but sometimes those cause happiness too, much like witches are known to do. These incantations are often referred to as cries, so the banshee connection is there. Pretty easy stuff. The Nasu Baba, a witch-like yokai with purple skin. Translated to the eggplant hag, this yokai isn't really evil, but of a repentant woman who tried to change her ways to avoid going to hell. She was said to be seen in 1571 on Mount fuck me, I should have fucking looked up this fucking pronunciation, before I fucking did this. FJ, you fucking moron, you do this every fucking time. Just, 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 just look it up. Just look it up right quick. Just do it. She was said to be seen in 1571 on Mount Hiei around a temple complex by fleeing monks after Oda Nobunaga attacked one of the temples and set it ablaze. When she is seen, it's usually to try and warn people of dangers by ringing a bell. If she meets a human, after they faint from shock, she uses her magic to help them and sends them on their way. Miss Magius can learn moves like Helping Hand, Hex, and Screech, with all tie into being a helpful but mischievous ghost or banshee. This all highly fits the Miss Magius being a ghost, scaring people, but at times helping them out with her incantations, warnings, and trying to bring happiness by the way of helping them out of danger. I've talked a little bit about Samhain in the previous two Pokemon, but this is where I expound upon a bit more since ghosts are a huge part of Halloween. Ghosts, spirits, hauntings, etc. are all baked into the essence of Halloween. Celtics in Ireland about 2,000 years ago began this tradition. They celebrated Samhain as a division of the lighter and darker halves of the year, aka from the summer to the winter. They also believed that on this night, the night of October 31st into November 1st, that our world and the spirit world are closest to each other, which allows spirits to more easily cross over into our world. As I've already mentioned, the Celts believed that this was a critical time of year, as there were many traditions followed, which included the Tlakcha, I forgot this was in the damn, hold on, which included the Tlaksa Fire Festival. I know I didn't say that right, but I looked up how to pronunciate it, and my American mouth and brain and throat does not does not make those sounds. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Irish people, any Irish people watching. My bad. Celts and many other people of the time believe the sun being less strong during this time of year was a reason for anxiety. They lit winter bonfires, which helped assist the sun as it crossed the heavens. With the sun setting, it descended into the underworld. The lord of the underworld, Dawn in Celtic lore, was able to more freely roam ours now, with a bunch of beings with them. These included both fairies and ghosts. At the time of Don's death, before he became Lord of the Underworld, it is said he wished for all his descendants to come to his house, Tech Duin, by saying, "To me, to my house, you shall come after your deaths." Obviously, if you're visiting someone after you've passed away, it's a pretty good likelihood that you're doing so as some sort of ghost. I thought about using Mimikyu here since it's a ghost type, dressed up in a costume, much like kids do to trick or treat. I also considered Spiritomb as well, due to it gathering 108 spirits into itself, like Don wanted to gather descendants into his house. But Spiritomb is based too much in Norse and Japanese legend, and they didn't vibe check with what a ghost looks like, or at least what Scooby-Doo, South Park, and entertainment media in general have drilled into my brain hole about dressing up as a ghost on Halloween. So, I'm going with Shuppet. Well, yes, I know it's not everyone's favorite Gengar. I still think Haunter's way cooler. Or something like Dusknoir. I just can't get the idea of being a kiddo and throwing a sheet with 2 holes cut out of it for eyeballs out of my brain hole. It doesn't even have to be a sheet either. Just generally long, flowing, lighter colored things. Usually white, with say like white face paint, would be more than enough to convey that you're a spirit from the other side. Because that's the look, that's the ghost cost. Low effort, like my content, and easily recognizable that anyone can wear. And Shuppet is the Pokemon I think of when this image comes to mind. Well, it's based on a Teruterubozu, which is a Japanese paper doll that resembles a ghost. It's very easy to see how it looks like what I described above. Basically, floating, flowing cloth with 2 prominent eyes and sometimes even a full face. Its sheet even gets a lighter color in its shiny form too, making it, to me, one of the most ghostly ghost-type Pokemon. Skeletons might be the first thing thus far that isn't directly related to the Celts and Samhain, though you could argue that Don would have some sort of skeleton roaming with him as he wandered around. Skeletons are the living undead, except they're missing like everything but the skeleton. They used to be revered, since they might be your friend or relative who passed on years back. You've seen them in science class. Everyone has heard and sung the song, and if you've played any sort of fantasy-based RPG, you've slaughtered them in mass. But at their core, skeletons and skulls are creepy, since they're the former living and breathing humans, or the equivalent, that are now mindless bone boys, who only want to topple over onto you for a jump scare or swing a rusted sword at your head. But I think they're a little more revered than this, and it's mostly due to Mexico and Dios de los Muertos, aka the Day of the Dead. This blends the creepiness and macabre of skeletons and the dead with the reverence of honoring the dead and the unique style of making skulls and skeletons colorful and celebratory. And while the Day of the Dead isn't quite on Halloween, they're in close proximity, and I think using skeletons and skulls for both of these holidays go hand in hand. Not to mention, things like the Grim Reaper are depicted usually as a skeleton with a scythe, and even on the seas, pirates would fly a Jolly Roger, which had a skull and crossbones on it, which would strike fear into the hearts of other ships. This one is hard to mess up since there were really only 4 choices I was gravitating towards. Marowak and Cubone obviously use bones as weapons and wear skulls, and Cubone's mother dying is baked into its lore, while Duskull literally has a skull on its cloak and is partially based on the Grim Reaper. But I think that Houndstone is a much more apt representation of skeletons overall. Yeah, I know, new Pokemon E151 only. Shut up, nerd. Houndstone is the ghost dog Pokemon, but it's far from looking like a typical ghost with its design. Skeletons are often depicted as rising from the graves in cemeteries, and Houndstone are said to sleep in graveyards. Further than that, the protuberance on his head is clearly reminiscent of a tombstone, which are also a common sight in graveyards or wherever you lay a person to rest. It doesn't like this protuberance being touched either, which leans into the fact that you never want to touch or desecrate a grave or tombstone. You could also see it as just being a bone coming out of its head too. The rest of its body is also very skeletal, as its face and limbs don't appear to have any sort of flesh on them, and they're just the skull and legs that are all bone, with the fur on its back likely being tumulus, which is essentially the earth that is placed over burial grounds, keeping with this theme. Also, nothing to do with skeletons or Halloween or anything. But Houndstone is said to be the most loyal of all the dog Pokemon, which is just adorable and makes Houndstone such a good boy, such a good boy, such a good boy. Long has the superstition of black cats being mischievous and evil little creatures persisted in our minds, and the fact that crossing paths with them brings bad luck. Media has a plethora of black cats like Luna from Sailor Moon, Felix the Cat, Snowball the Second from The Simpsons, and Salem from Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Not to mention the phrase from Groucho Marx, which goes, "If a black cat crosses your path, it signifies that the animal is going somewhere." Wait, that's not the right one. This is the one. When witches go riding and black cats are seen, the moon laughs and whispers, "'Tis near Halloween." Back in the Middle Ages is when all of this first took root, likely in Europe, in more populous places or cities where a great number of them could gather. They are cats, and we all know cats are menaces. They're usually nocturnal and roam around at night, with them being black as well. Most anyone ever saw from them at night were their eyes, since cats are agile and quick, which cultivated the belief that they were mysterious and evil. In medieval Germany specifically, they believed that if a black cat crossed your path from left to right, that you would be cursed, while in Europe, black cats were frightening. In other cultures like Japan, they were more revered as helpful and brought luck, while Egypt worshipped them as sacred. More specific tales of black cats abound too, like if a woman has a black cat and you were to treat it badly, they would curse you and you'd be blamed for causing it. Or if a black cat walked into or was in the room with someone as they ended up dying, it was thought that the cat was the omen of their death. In America, though, the superstitions are a lot more simple and likely tied in with the Salem witch trials in some form, as black cats were not trusted. They were often associated with witches and sorcery, but pilgrims were all about unjustly burning things in horrific ways back then, and were known to burn black cats on Shrove Tuesday to protect one's homes from fires. This Pokemon I've chosen isn't Liepard, but it is what likely turned into Liepard. Liepard kind of worked for what I was going for, a dark cat Pokemon that also happens to be pure dark type. I think the cut Pokemon line revealed from the Space World demo, Rinrin and Birurun, fit the bill a little more for me. I love the designs, as they are all black cats who fit the bill of being mischievous and stealing things, including being a squatter in abandoned shrines. With Rinrin's dex entry stating they are, quote, quite mischievous and, quote, steal offerings from other shrines, while its evolved form in Birurun steals food and objects for its shrine home. You could almost equate that part about townsfolk leaving things out for Birurun to the townspeople of Europe getting sick of cats messing with stuff and being proactive about it. Like I mentioned, the Japanese don't really believe in the superstition of the black cat, but rather they're lucky, which is why they are more akin to shrine protectors and have bells and the bell motif in their design and are willing to help out other Pokemon. Despite a full moon often being depicted in Halloween art and entertainment, it rarely ever falls on Halloween. As you'd expect, with 31 days being in October, it on average happens about once every 20 years or so. Nothing in the lunar calendar or astronomy links a full moon to All Hallows Eve, and it's likely more that the star cluster of the Pleiades being the most prominent in the sky since it marks the changing of seasons, which makes sense as Samhain also incorporates the changing of seasons in its celebrations. We're talking about it because Samhain does explain the connection between a full moon and Halloween a little bit better. As we've talked about, Samhain is when our world and the supernatural world are at its closest. European traditions use the lunar calendar to predict events, and these texts were called lunaries and contain medical and liturgical information for not just October but all months. This is the main link, as Halloween is all about looking into the future and the supernatural. At these times of the year, the seasons changing are when our worlds are closest to each other. It was feared that ghosts and spirits were able to come back and harm people, animals, or even crops. That's why celebrations like Samhain are important for offering food and lighting bonfires so that these spirits wouldn't come and mess with everyone's lives. Even more so, witches then began to be believed to be quite supernatural and evil, and were most likely to cause problems on the fateful night. Not to mention, it was believed that witches were devil worshippers and in league with Diana, the goddess of the moon. I can't really mess this one up since there was really only one choice for this, and it was pretty easy, as Lunala fits the bill completely, being ghost type and the moon Pokemon. Not only is it based on the moon, it's also a bat, so we're hitting two categories in one. The first obvious comparison is in the design itself. It's shaped like the moon and looks like a bat. Not only that, it has its full moon phase, i.e. it becomes a much lighter colored blue, much like a blue moon when it happens, and is likely from the once in a blue moon turn of phrase, or just because blue moons rarely happen at an average about one every 33 months, and light blue, goes with the purple, white, and gold colored scheme. Yeah. Furthermore, the bat half of Lunala is likely based on the still living Hawaiian Hooray bat, or the now extinct Sinmaporion, aka the ghost bat. Lunala could also be based on the Kamazataz, a Mayan bat god often associated with death and sacrifice. Both obviously are very Halloween. In its full moon phase, it also opens up a third eye, which is often connected with being able to see the future and predicting the future of the upcoming season, while trying to keep death from invading animals and crops is a central theme that we've been talking about. Finally, Lunala could also be connected to the Hine Nui Tepo, who in Maori legend is the goddess of the night and receiver of the dead, so essentially could be a long-lost cousin of Dawn, Lord of the Underworld. This all circles back to Samhain and how the Celts lit those fateful bonfires and threw those celebrations to ward off ghosts and evil spirits as the seasons changed and the underworld was closest to ours. After Christianity took root in the Middle Ages, Samhain shifted to being called All Hallows Eve, but the tradition of using light to ward off evil spirits remained, though instead of giant raging bonfires, they got smaller. Since gourds and pumpkins were readily available, they became the default container. They put holes in them originally to let the light escape as well. There were no goofy carvings yet, though for a while when settlers first came to America, gourds weren't as easily obtained, so turnips also became a vessel for these lights for a while. The legend of Stingy Jack is where these light sources get faces and eventually become the carved pumpkins we know today. Stingy Jack was an Irish blacksmith and famed drunkard. Unlucky for him is that one night he ran into the devil at a pub. Jack, as his name suggested, was stingy and didn't want to pay for his drinks with the devil. So he convinced the devil to turn himself into money so that he could pay. But he did not end up paying and stashed the devil next to a silver cross in his pocket, not allowing him to change back. At least until he promised not to come for Jack's soul for 10 years. 10 years end up passing, and the devil meets Jack on the road. But before going with the devil, Jack asks if he could get him a pristine apple from a tree. The devil, thinking nothing of this, obliged and climbed the tree to get it. But while he was climbing, Jack carved a cross into the tree so that the devil could no longer come down. That is, until he promised he wouldn't take his soul for the rest of his life. Years later, after Jack died, God would not allow him into heaven, for obvious reasons, and the devil was not allowed to have his soul either. So the devil sent Jack along his way in the afterlife, with the path being dark and basically aimless. Jack pleaded with the devil to give him some sort of light, so the devil gave him a burning coal, which Jack put into a carved turnip and has been roaming the earth ever since, leading him to be called Jack of the Lantern, or Jack-o'-lantern for short. Gourgeist is the pumpkin Pokemon, and it only feels right to close out this Halloween episode with it, and Pumpkaboo are the pumpkin Pokemon. Gourgeist is obviously based on jack-o'-lanterns, and the unique quirk of being able to come in 4 sizes: small, average, large, and American, aka supersize. Which makes sense, especially when you think of all the different sizes of pumpkins, including the massive ones entered in pumpkin growing contests. Its bottom half is a carved pumpkin, while its top half resembles a candle that you often see put in them to light up the designs. The curl on the top of its head is likely its candle wick, while the rest of its hair is the melting wax from the candle. Not so creepy yet, until you learn that Gourgeist's singing curses people. They also play tricks on adults, and if the adults fall for them, they take them into the afterlife. Also, supersized ones forcibly drag people into the afterlife as well. They also seem to go door to door with this tomfoolery too, which is just the worst type of trick-or-treating that can happen to you. So, if you, your kids, your loved ones, or anyone you know go trick-or-treating or get a knock on the door this Halloween, you better hope it's not a supersized Gourgeist, or you might be meeting Jack-o'-lantern wandering the afterlife.